Hello,
Awesome.
everyone, and welcome to the Almost Dropouts podcast. My name is Daivik, and today I have Fuad. Fuad, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Fuad. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be on this podcast. What do you want me to say about myself?
Maybe let's start off with maybe where you've worked in the past.
Yeah, for sure. So I've worked at a number of different companies before. Most notably, I finished an internship at Twitter this summer. Before that, I was at Tesla working on energy software. I've also worked for the U.S. Office of National Intelligence, specifically the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. I worked at Wealthsimple, which is a financial technology startup, Publicis Sapient, which is a consulting firm. So quite a few companies, and all of them have been kind of like software related jobs. My time at the U.S. government was more of a data science position, and then I've also done like a research position at a hospital, and that was more like medical related research. And yeah, that's because I study electrical and biomedical engineering at McMaster University. So with the biomed eng, initially I thought that's kind of the field I was going to go into, but more recently and the last couple of years, I've been going pretty hard on tech and recruiting for that and like trying to explore the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's fair, man. Like I know a lot of people who switch, sort of like they'll go into one engineering and then they'll end up in software or they'll end up in a different field completely. So I think
For
that's a
sure.
normal transition. But yeah, guys. So like Fuad said, he's done a couple co-ops now in the past, and we have diversity on the podcast. He doesn't go to Waterloo; he goes to McMaster. So there you go. But
Nice,
yeah,
nice.
and also actually, to before we'll talk about this later in the podcast too. But Fuad has his own podcast into the adultverse, which he
Yes,
does with his
sir.
co-host Damien. So we'll give you more information on that in the future. But starting off, let's talk about your experiences through these co-ops. So what have been some lessons that you've learned throughout them? It can be really anything. It can be like academically, personally, professionally. What are some things you've learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a lot of co-ops. I think about seven so far. So there have been a lot of lessons learned. I've like really grown throughout, the terms I've done, and sort of just like, especially over the last 16 months, because so for background, over the past 16 months, I took a year off of school essentially. And I did four-month co-op terms in a row. So I wasn't doing
Mhm.
like co-op every other term like most of the Waterloo kids do, but I did them kind of all at once. And so that was definitely a period of like hyper growth for me in terms of my career and like obviously personal development as well. Just because you're moving all the time, like constantly, you're constantly interviewing. Like I think I interviewed for a year straight with no breaks, and then now I'm already interviewing for full time. So yeah, that's just not super enjoyable.
Yeah.
You're hopping teams all the time. As soon as you get comfortable somewhere, you kind of have to go. So it definitely keeps you on your toes, and you definitely learn a lot from it. So there's been a lot of lessons I've learned for sure. I think some notable ones. I think like firstly, I just didn't really understand, the kind of hustle I needed to have in order to like really take control over my own career. I think that's definitely one of the first lessons I learned. Like
Mhm.
when I first started recruiting and things like that, I was like, oh yeah, I do leak code, like I do this, I do that, and then I like
Yeah.
talked to some people and I was like, wait a second, like they're doing so much more than I was doing, and that was a little bit of a shocker. And I'm not saying that like you need to do that. Like there's nothing wrong with like like not wanting to work at a FANG company and things like that. But like, to some extent, I did feel like I kind of wanted to prove myself. And like, I was like, wait, like, maybe I just need to hustle harder and things like that. So that was definitely a lesson. Like anything worth doing, I think is worth putting the work in. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's not necessarily linear related. Okay. So that's one lesson. Anything worth doing is definitely worth putting the work in. Number two, I think, was that work is not necessarily linearly related to success. And so what I mean by that
Right.
is that, um, I had the impression that, like if I did more leak code, I would get a better job. And like that was like, like that was the equation, right? But what you
Right.
don't realize is that there's a lot of luck in not just like getting jobs, but like success in general, like whatever conventional success is, right?
Mhm.
And so how I like to think of it is like sort of an analogy where, let's say everybody starts off on an even playing field, which they don't, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Even if everyone arrives at an even playing field, let's say you have like a 20% chance of landing your dream job in your first year of university, right? Um,
Mhm.
and then for every year that you work super hard, you increase your odds by 30%, right? And so by your second year, that you should be at 50. By your third year, you should be at 80. And then theoretically, by your fourth year, you should be pretty much there, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that even if you're at 80% in your third year and somebody else is at 20% in their first year, there's still a high probability, like there's still a chance it's still going to happen that, one of them might get, their dream job, and you might
Yeah.
not get yours even in your third year after 3 years of working your ass off and they've done zero, right? Even in a world that assumes completely, equal playing field from the beginning and just a little bit of randomness, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that was like definitely a big lesson for me. Just like learning that, you really got to focus on the things you can change. And there's a lot of things you can't change. There's a lot of luck, and you can't really get caught up in that. And you can't really compare yourself to people. You just got to have faith that, at the end of the day, either you work really hard that year and you increase your hours by 30%, or you don't. And
Right.
that's really the choice is completely yours. And that's a choice, like, you have to make personally. And, sometimes it won't result in you getting what you want. But at the end of the day, I don't know. For me, it's an easy decision. It's like either you work for it or you don't. And if you don't work for it, you're obviously not going to get it. So you might as
Yeah.
well put the work in. So that was a big lesson for sure. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I have a couple other things I want to touch on.
Yeah, I think like quick thoughts on that is just like I think to sort of go alongside that is resiliency. Like you can work
Yeah,
really hard, and it might not work out, but I think not being down on yourself, not being like okay, like I did all this work, but I didn't get the end goal. You know, as I said, like at the end of the day, especially for these co-op terms, but even for
yeah,
full time, right? Like this is well, like it's not really a race, but like if you are trying to go for that goal, just because you don't get it in the immediate term doesn't necessarily mean you have to throw all that progress that you made away.
for sure. Yeah,
So keep working towards increasing your chances, and soon enough, like when you reach 95% chance, like at that point, luck isn't as much of a factor. It still is, of course,
yeah,
but you can
yeah.
just keep working towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's beautifully put. I think, yeah, it's a marathon, not a race. Like sometimes you'll lose, like, oh, or I'm saying lose, like, these things are really hard to compare. I know there was like that one post recently where the guy tried to make like an intern comparator or something, like, or an internship like
Oh,
ranking
really?
system. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you saw it on LinkedIn, but some guy was like trying to make like an internship ranking system based on like prestige and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know, like I'm not really into comparing things like that. Like, like I didn't do any of my co-ops because like purely because of clout, or like because I thought they were like really sick companies or something like that. Like just because I
Yeah,
really believed in the mission that I was working on, the teams that I was working on, and it wasn't just pay either. Like there were definitely positions I turned down for higher pay that I could have taken, especially. You've co-opted to Tesla. Tesla is notorious for not having the
yeah,
highest intern pay in the Bay, and
hmm
it's like, yeah, like you pick the roles that you care about, you pick the roles that you want to work on. So I'm not really into comparing things, but at the same time, like sometimes there's something to be said about um, like people compare themselves to others in the short term future, and they're like, oh, this person's getting better co-ops than me, or whatever it is. And I think that's pretty toxic. You just got to really have faith in the work you're
yeah,
doing, and have faith in the marathon rather than the race. So yeah, that was definitely a big lesson. I think another lesson I learned was, yeah, like kind of relating to that company cloud thing. In the beginning I was very much like, oh, the big names, I want to work at like the big end thing, blah blah blah, right?
yeah,
And I think something I realized pretty quick is that your company doesn't mean that much, especially if it's a big company. Really, all you can really have faith on is your team. Because
hmm
if you're in like a huge company like Google or Facebook or something like that, there isn't really like, yeah, there is company culture. Obviously, there's like values that a company has and things like that. But by and large, you're really only interacting with your team and maybe a couple of sister teams around you. And
yeah,
so that team interaction and that team vibe matters way, way, way more than whatever name the company has.
100%.
You
Yep.
can be on a team you hate at a great company, or you can be in a team you love on like a company that isn't like as attractive on paper, right? And so I think that's something that really, really mattered, and that's something that I've changed in terms of my recruiting practices as well. Like, I think a huge thing for me is like I schedule like 3 or 4 extra meetings with every interviewer, every like manager I'm interviewing for, every team I'm interviewing for, just to make sure that the vibe is good. Like I
Yep.
really like um I really vibe with the people on the team. I'm able to joke around with them because, like, to be honest, work is a significant portion of your life. And I know people say like, "Oh, you're not living to work; you're working to live." But to be honest, like you're working 8 hours a day. That's a significant portion of you living, and you want to be living
Yeah.
with people who are good. Like people you believe are good people, people who you can turn to if you have something come up, people who will be understanding if you have to take time off. You know, um, People you can just shoot the shit with. At lunch, things like that. And I think that really, really matters. So yeah, that's something I would like. I would say is like been a huge lesson. Like when I recruited my last time versus when I recruited my first time, it was like night and day in terms of
Yeah.
that.
No, 100%, man. I'm totally with you there. Like the team matters so much, and especially your manager. Like they're the ones, especially during internships, are going to give you those opportunities. And so if you don't vibe with your manager, they're probably not going to give you many opportunities. And just in
Yep.
general, like you have to have a certain understanding with them. And I think it becomes pretty apparent, like even when you're giving an interview with them, whether that vibe is at least there or not. Initially, like it's obviously going to change over time as you get to know each other more. But
Yeah.
there should at least be that foundation.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They're like, oh, I got an interview, for example, with Apple or something. But like,
Yeah.
if you talk with the manager and you really don't vibe with them, it doesn't matter if it's going to be Apple, Google, wherever. That team
Mhm. Mhm.
culture, especially and the manager culture, really matters. And yeah, it's going to be a bad experience in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it doesn't really matter what the company name is. If you don't like the team, you should probably stay as far away as you can. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that was another lesson. And then yeah, I don't know, just taking a step back and like thinking about my career a little bit more short term versus long term. So I used to be like a chronic over planner, and I talk about this a little bit on my podcast as well. I think in the feeling behind episode, but yeah, I used to be a chronic over planner. Like I would have like a 10-year plan for my life and like an 8-year plan and a 5-year plan. And like, I would know every single step I'm going to take in the next couple years to like get where I need to go and like things like that. And that like, I think like I had good intentions, like I was like ambitious, focused, like blah blah blah. But I think at the end of the day, you know, first off, and almost none of those were true. I thought I was going to go to med school when I was 16. Second
Yeah.
off, like um I don't know. I just think it's pretty insane for a 16-year-old, 17-year-old to be making decisions for a 21-year-old. Like there's
Mhm.
just factually a lot of life you haven't gone through and a lot of things you haven't experienced. And so when you're 21 and you're still adhering to the same decisions you made when you were 16, 17, like obviously, yeah, you want to set yourself a direction and things like that. And you don't want to just like be a slave to like whatever like current is like going through your life at the moment, and like whatever like turmoil is happening. But at the same time, like yeah, like I was making decisions for myself at 16 based on like city and things like that when I hadn't really experienced that much, when I hadn't even
Right.
tried out different careers. And so like I would say a big lesson has been just giving yourself a little bit more freedom and just like trying things out and like taking a step back and being like, yo, my career is going to be like, what, at least 30 years, like at
Yeah.
least 30 years, right? And so if I spend a couple years in this role, like does it really make a difference long term? And I don't mean in the sense of being complacent, but I mean in the sense of like trying something in the hopes that it might pay off like longer term, right? So if you want to
Yep.
make a career switch and like it turns out to not be the right career switch, it doesn't matter. It's been a year or 2 years. Go back to the whatever career you wanted to go previously, or something like that, right?
Mhm.
And if you want to change companies, like just go for it, and you can figure it out. And your career will always be all right in the long run as long as you work hard and you do the right things. And so yeah, I think that like yeah, having more of a micro focus allows me to focus a little bit more on the moment and like on the day to day and really making the most of my current positions rather than like worrying about what I'm going to do 5 years in the future and like trying to set up all the chess pieces so that it can come true.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you there. I think uh like being able to say, okay, it's not part of the plan, but let's try it anyway, I think is really important. And
Yeah,
um like I was also one of those kids. I think a lot of people in STEM are like this, where
for
they'll
sure.
sort of have a plan of what they want, where they want to be, and like how they can get there in the next
Yeah,
five
all these
years.
type A kids, man, in the same
Uh,
program. It's kind of
Honestly,
insane.
but
Yeah,
but you know what happens, right? Like for myself, right? I
yeah,
came into first year and I started on top of the world. I'm like, yeah, I'm a pretty smart guy. Everybody used to tell me that there's no mark depletion or anything like that. Sorry,
yeah,
everybody used to tell me that there's a big difference between university and school in terms of like how
yeah,
hard it is and stuff. But I'm like, yo, like I know what I'm doing. It's never
yeah,
going to be
yeah,
like that. And so for me to go from that point of view to my first year where I was like, I got my first midterms back and I actually did terrible. It was probably the worst midterms I've ever done in my life.
oh yeah,
Um, like that itself already signaled to me like, okay, it's not all going part of the plan. But I was so adamant on keeping the plan going that it sort of became a more self-destructive loop. And I think, as time went on, what I started to realize, especially like, as I got more familiar with university and stuff, is that let me just focus on the immediate, what can I do right now, what feels right now.
yeah,
um, and then naturally things will just work out because I'll know, at least in the moment, I made the decision I made because it felt right.
yeah,
And whatever the consequences are of that, I'll figure it out. I have that enough self belief in myself that I can still figure it out, make amends or make a good thing out of
Yeah.
it. So I
Yeah.
think definitely like that's definitely something I learned too. So definitely resonate with that.
Yeah, that's great. I think that self belief is a super, super important point. And yeah, man, like I think there's some like next quote that like describes this pretty well, but I'm blanking on it right now. But the idea is, the future doesn't actually exist, neither does the past. Like all that exists is the present. And so
Yeah,
like if you're stressing about what you've done before and like you're worrying about what you're gonna do, then you don't make the best decisions right now. And that's really all that sets you up for the future, right? Like whatever good decisions you make right now. So like I used to think about like, oh, like what if I, like spend too much time recruiting and then I like don't like have good grades anymore and then what's going to happen, like blah blah blah. But like I realized like all you got to do is do your best with recruiting and do your best with school. And like if you do your best with both those things, like you're never like going to be in a bad position in the future. You know what I mean? Like you
yeah,
just got to make the right decisions at the time that are most important. Like if there's a midterm and a job you really care about on the same day, like grind as hard as you can for whatever has most priority and then grind as hard as you can for the second one. Like you
yeah,
can't like think about things like 5 years in the future at that moment. You just got to think in the next couple of days, right? So yeah, I think that was super super useful to me.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, so those are some like major lessons I learned. Obviously there's like a ton of technical stuff because like I'm a self-taught coder, and so obviously I had a hard time adjusting to some of these companies in terms of like the technical workload and like learning software engineering and things like that, and like obviously how a bigger company operates because I'd never worked at like a big company before. So yeah, I can talk about that a little bit if you want to, but yeah, that's
yeah.
been that's been sort of like the more personal learnings, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. That those have been all great. I tend to agree with all those. Like, I mean, I've learned a lot of that type of stuff too. So I can definitely
Mhm.
see where you're coming from with those.
For sure, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I guess trying to move on to so you've worked at a lot of big companies now. Twitter, Tesla, the National Intelligence Agency, and Well Simple and stuff. So what's been cool to work on? Because I definitely know for myself one of the reasons I decided to go to Tesla is because as much as I enjoyed my previous internships, I'm definitely somebody who's driven by the products that I'm working on.
Mhm, mhm.
Because I want to make sure that at least if I'm going to do work, I want to make sure that's something I care about, I'm passionate about. And
Definitely.
I think Tesla offered me that opportunity. So for yourself, what's been cool to work on? Twitter, Tesla, wherever you worked.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely worked on some things I personally think are really really cool. Yeah. So for those listening, Daivik and I actually worked on the same org at Tesla. So we worked on very similar products in terms of like Powerwall, Power Pack, Mega Pack, Solar Roof, things like that. So that's pretty cool. That was obviously a great experience. So I worked on the energy software team at Tesla. We were basically writing the cloud functions and control systems and telemetry systems for distributed fleet of batteries, so like AutoBidder, um, like you know, what else? Like the South Australia virtual power plant, the world's biggest battery, like things like that. And that was super, super cool. Like obviously super related to, just like one of the biggest issues in the world today, which is climate change and solving that in a sustainable way and solving that to like actually meet the energy needs of the current as well as the future people on this earth. And I think that was really,
Mhm.
really important. So that was obviously an amazing experience. Twitter as well, Twitter's a product I use a lot. I used to only lurk, but I've been tweeting a little bit more now recently, especially about my
Yeah,
internship because they really encourage you to do that at Twitter. And at Twitter, I worked on the Triage Tools team, which is part of the health organization. And basically, what they're responsible for is ensuring that healthy conversation happens on Twitter. And so, what that means is removing things like child pornography, abusive content, hate speech, misinformation, election misinformation, things like
hmm
that. And so that was definitely a really really impactful mission as well, and that's the reason I ended up choosing Twitter over my other offers at the time, because
hmm
I truly felt that like serving the public conversation was something that was really really important, and it's pretty cool because actually I was at Tesla. At a very interesting time at Tesla, and also at Twitter at a very interesting time at
yeah.
Twitter. Like a lot of things happened. So at Tesla, like the stock price jumped like super super high, like literally like 4 days after I joined.
People are going crazy, man.
Yeah, yeah, they were going insane. This is back in January, and then it jumped up again after I left. But like that was like the first jump, and it was like insane.
Yeah,
Like Elon was like, "Whoa, the stock price is way too high, lol," or like whatever. And so that was pretty insane. We released Model 3, or sorry, Model Y. My mistake. When I was there at Tesla, so I got to see some of those like the first models and like sit in one of
yeah.
those with one of the VPs or whatever, and that was pretty cool. And then yeah, Twitter, COVID and misinformation was like a huge topic that my
It
team was
still
trying
is.
to tackle.
Yeah.
Yeah, still is for sure. with and misinformation relating to that. Obviously, like BLM and those movements as well. There was a lot of hate speech surrounding that and like things like that that our team had to like kind of carefully navigate. Trump's tweets as well. Twitter got into a couple altercations with him, and I worked on teams that like helped support that process. So that was like very, very interesting to say the least.
Yeah.
Also, Twitter got hacked while I was there, and that definitely threw a wrench into some of the workflows and things like that I was using at my internship. So that was really interesting as well. And so yeah, just working in that space was really cool. I really felt like every day I was like contributing to a mission that really mattered because you
Yeah.
could see people like being affected by it. Like there were journalists who were murdered by white supremacists because of like their location was spelled on Twitter. It's like doxing, right? Which is like such a big issue, and it's something our team directly works with, and like things like
Yeah.
that, right? So that was really, really impactful to see. And also, like I do consider myself a little bit more socially active in terms of like social justice and things like that. So it was like a mission I thought was really important. So that was cool to work on. My time so technically I worked at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which is a joint venture between the CIA and the FBI. It was started
Damn.
after
Okay.
9/11, but basically it's just to coordinate like intelligence between the two systems because they don't always speak to each other and really have like one unified intelligence operative.
Right.
And so I work with and don't worry, this is all like non NDA, so I can
Okay.
talk
I was
about
like,
it. Yeah.
editing might be fun on this.
There's some things I can't talk about, but all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
things
Fair
I talk
enough.
about I can talk about. Don't worry.
Okay.
But
Perfect.
yeah, they've given me the brief. But basically, so yeah, I'm a U.S. citizen for those of you who don't know. So it makes a little. Well, I mean, it's impossible to work here unless you have a U.S. citizenship. So that's a little bit unfortunate for all you Canadian Waterloo listeners out there. But yeah, so I worked as a data scientist with the National Counterproliferation Center. So what that is it's a center designed to basically like anti like proliferation. So what that means is nuclear proliferation, biological proliferation, and cybersecurity. Those are the three main things that they focus on now. And so I worked in the like like bioterrorism department essentially,
Mhm.
and I was working on novel compression techniques for DNA algorithms. So basically, DNA information is super huge, and there's some like bioweapons that people develop like in the field, and then when these weapons are tested or something and scanned, the results need to be like sent back to the U.S. for analysis and things like that. So let's say you find a sample in the field and you want to send it back to the U.S. for analysis. You typically can't send like the entire shipment, like you can't just Amazon Prime like a box of DNA or something like that. Um, so what you do is you'd have to scan it, you'd have to like digitize it, and you'd have to send it. And there isn't always a good persistent internet connection or a fast internet connection at the time. So
Right.
the U.S. government has a huge interest in, yeah, just like compressing DNA information and like being able to like send it across like weaker connections or slower connections. And so
Mhm.
most of the stuff I worked on was like open source, and they use a lot of open source libraries and things like that as well, which is pretty cool.
Okay.
Government
Interesting.
is notoriously bad for things like that, and
Yeah.
I think Odney is for sure stepping in the right direction in terms of like using a little bit more open source and making use of that. So that was really cool. Obviously, super impactful. Unfortunately, like there's a lot of red tape at like industry like that or like organizations like that, and there's a lot of like confidentiality and things like that.
Of
So it's
course.
a little
Yeah.
bit sticky to get into, but I think there was some really good lessons learned about like how process works on like huge organization scales,
Yeah.
and even across countries and things like that. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, I guess the other one, Wall Simple as well. Yeah, Wall Simple is great. I love Wall Simple. I think if I like, I kind of want to experience another city, for the young part of my career because I've lived in Toronto for a while now. But if
Right.
I were to stay in Toronto, I don't think there's any other company I'd work for. Wall Simple is absolutely amazing. I loved everyone I met there. I joined at a really opportune time in the sense that we were launching a lot of products, and we had kind of reached critical mass in terms of like being big enough to kind of have a lot of engineering support. So we were about like 250, 240 people when I joined. So we had
Right.
100 engineers. So that's more than enough engineers to kind of like support you through that process of being an intern and like having subject matter experts on a lot of different, topics and things like that. While we were also small enough that like I got to get coffee with the CEO, right? And so like
Right.
that was a pretty cool experience for sure. Talking to one of my idols and like being able to interact with them. And just like yeah, being a part of that company culture, like it's located in a really cool spot in Toronto near Trinity Bellwoods Park, which is my favorite park in Toronto, just like a great spot. There's a
Right.
ton of coffee shops on Queen Street West if you're familiar with the area. It's like a super hipstery part of Toronto, and just I love it. Like really good architecture, things like that. So yeah, I really love that term. I worked on the funding team, which is responsible for deposits and withdrawals. So basically,
Okay.
when you deposit money in the app, like how does it actually flow into? Oh, sorry. I guess I should give a little bit of a background on Wealthsimple if people don't know. But yeah, Wealthsimple is like a fintech startup, and they're basically like the Robinhood of Canada. They do like zero commission trading. They also do like a hands-free investment option where you just like deposit money and they manage it for you, but they don't charge like the management fee that like mutual funds and things like that charge.
Oh, I never knew about that part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually how they started. The zero commission trading, like Wealthsimple Trade, is like a separate product, and I mean, it's under the same company, obviously, but they launched that like 2 years into their like time as a
Oh,
company. So
okay.
yeah, yeah. Wealthsimple Trade's like more well known, I would say, like amongst our generation, but like Wealthsimple Core is like used way more heavily. Like, there's a lot more users of Wealthsimple Core. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, and then they recently actually, when I was there, they acquired Simple Tax, which is sort of like TurboTax, like they do tax software, and I think about like 500,000 people in Canada use that, which is like a huge, significant portion of the Canadian population, considering we only have like 30 million.
Yeah.
And so that was cool. Like actually, I got to see like the CEO of Simple Tax like go through onboarding at Wealthsimple, which is like crazy because like he's like a CEO of his own company. So that was really
Yeah.
interesting. So yeah, I love Wealthsimple as well. You know, beautiful office space, like great architecture, like really great people. Yeah, so yeah, I got to work on a lot of cool things there as well. So honestly, I loved all my co-op terms. Um, then at the consulting one at Publicis Sapient, I worked on Walmart.ca. I'll be honest, not a huge fan of Walmart.ca. Maybe that was a little bit of a less exciting term, but we all got to start somewhere, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, that's a lot of experience, man. Damn.
yeah,
What I'm getting from there, they got to apply to Well Simple because apparently their office is super nice and they have a
it's
good, dope.
beautiful. Yeah, I'll
But
send
oh,
you a
definitely.
YouTube video after this because they have like a I don't know, it's one of my favorite architects that designed the space, and it's just like
Okay.
it's really cool. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No, that sounds great, man. That's definitely like super interesting experience all around the board.
hmm
And I'm curious to see where you'll go next. But
yeah.
okay, let's say this. I know it's like hard to quantify, but which one do you think as an overall experience you like the most? Like which company
Oh,
or which
see, this is a
co-op?
tough question because I'm recruiting right now, so I don't know who I want
Ooh.
listening to this. You know,
Okay, okay, that's fair.
uh,
That's fair. That's fair.
but I will say that I think in terms of a remote experience, I had a fully remote experience at Twitter, and I was very impressed with how they handled it remotely. Because like I think remote internships are very difficult at the best of times, and then a
Right.
remote internship during COVID and during the wildfires in California and like during the hacks that Twitter had, I think Twitter did a really great job of it. So I think I got to give them some brownie points for that. I wouldn't say
Mhm.
that. I wouldn't say there's like one experience that it's like stand out like the best experience, but I
Right.
think that was super impressive from Twitter for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, definitely. Like, I think that's, with COVID-19, it goes like a lot of companies really had to scramble, especially for their internship programs,
For sure.
to keep them alive. So, kudos to Twitter there.
Yeah,
And yeah,
definitely.
I think,
Yeah, sorry, it was kind of a cop out answer, but yeah,
no, no,
um,
that's fine, man. I totally understand.
for sure.
Uh, Maybe I'll ask you after you get a full-time
Yeah,
job.
yeah, that'd be a great idea. Actually, I'd love to, or maybe even offline we could talk about it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your podcast now, Into the Adult Verse. So, what's sort of the inspiration for that? What is it about? And what are maybe some future episodes we can look forward to?
Ooh, for sure. I'm glad we got to this topic, and yeah, I definitely look up to your podcast as well. Like, I think we started ours. You started yours before mine, I believe, but yeah, we started ours at similar times, and it's been interesting to see yours grow alongside ours. So yeah, Damien and I have a podcast called Into the Adultverse. Actually, we're looking at rebranding, so let me know if you have any suggestions on like names and things like that.
Sure.
Because I love your name, the Almost Dropouts. But so yeah, so our Into the Adultverse started out as kind of a podcast to help people entering adulthood kind of navigate that space. So that includes like professional development, motivation, psychology, self improvement, like that, all those sorts of topics. You talk about a lot of them on this podcast as well. But honestly, it's kind of grown past that at this point. Like
Hmm.
we've started having a lot more guests on. We started talking about like a lot more like sciencey topics, just basically things that we're interested in. And so we've
Yeah.
actually been looking at rebranding because we're interested in kind of just like capturing the full scales like what we do as a platform and like what we're trying to build as a community as well. But yeah, so our podcast discusses a lot of those topics. We have some really interesting guests. We have some really cool episodes coming up. Um, there are a couple of guests, that we're still in the works with, but one guest that I can't mention is the VP Eng of Twitter, Nick
Oh wow.
Caldwell, who used to be head of technology at Reddit, and also like co-founder of Power BI, which is now acquired by Microsoft. He worked directly with Bill Gates. Super, super, super cool dude. He has his own like nonprofit. It's called Dev/Color, which helps like black males get into tech. And so yeah, he's appearing on the podcast in like 3 days, which is super, super cool. So that's an exciting episode to look forward to. There's a couple other ones that that are coming up from people from Twitter, which I think are really, really exciting as well. So glad I could leverage those connections at the time. We're also just trying to like capture as much as we can in terms of topics. Obviously, a lot more psychology stuff coming out, a lot more motivational stuff coming out because those are sort of our hallmarks. But also just like talking through some of the issues that Damien and I are going through. Damien's going through grad school, so we're going to do an episode on that.
Damn.
Just
Okay.
sort of like is grad school worth it in 2020 type of thing.
Hmm.
Online school, remote work, like topics around that, like choosing a city because I'm actually doing that right now. Um, like deciding between full time offers and like deciding where I want to live. So that's like definitely a big thing. So yeah, those are some of the future episodes you can look forward to and sort of some of the content we've put out already. What inspired us to do this? Actually, I've been trying to start a podcast for a long time. I had initially tried to start one 3 years ago when I was in my sophomore year of college, and it kind of flopped because I was trying to do it with a lot of different friends, and we had some really good conversations. But the thing was, it was hard to coordinate like 6 or 7 people's schedules and like really, I don't know, like really have like a set direction on it.
Right.
And so after that, I kind of like tabled the idea, but it was always kind of in the back of my head. And then this is actually a pretty cool story. So Damien and I met because there's this organization called the McMaster Energy Organization that is on campus at Mac that hosts like a bunch of different events, a case competition, like things like that, all relating to like the world of energy and clean energy. And so one day they hosted a tour of Google's Sidewalk Labs, which is
Oh,
Google's like,
cool.
smart city startup. They're no
Hmm.
longer located in Toronto, but they were for like 3 years until like a couple months ago.
Yeah.
They recently had to pull out because of COVID and like a couple other things. But yeah, Sidewalk Labs is pretty famous. Google's like Alphabet, technically, smart city startup. And so we got to go on a tour of that and got to see some of the amazing things they're working on, like new road designs, new power designs, designs for like shipping systems within buildings, new like materials for building like for building buildings, like a new composite wood that like wouldn't be flammable, like things like that. Like
Wow.
ML to like like dynamically like determine power output at certain points, like things like that, which is super, super cool. And so we took like a big yellow school bus on the way there, and I was sitting like in one of the rows, and like Damien was sitting in a row like across from me, and like he was sitting next to one of my friends, so I started talking to them. And then like Damien joined in on the conversation, and we kind of got to talking and stuff. And he seemed like a pretty chill dude. And then we had our tour or whatever. We're coming back on the bus, and on the bus back, we end up sitting together, and we have like an amazing conversation on the bus. It's just like super, super good conversation. Like I don't know, I hadn't hit it off with someone like that in a long time. Love at
Right.
first sight type of thing. And then we like I don't know, that was it. We went home, we went our separate ways. I kind of forgot about it, and then a week later, Damien messaged me on LinkedIn. And I'd never really done this sort of thing. Like I wasn't like cold emailing people on LinkedIn. I literally just had made LinkedIn like a few months before that. I wasn't really
Hmm.
into the career scene and things like that before. Um, yeah, honestly, I'm a little bit of a late bloomer in terms of co-op and stuff. I didn't actually like apply for co-ops until like sophomore year, so second year. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, Damien messaged me on LinkedIn. He's like, "Yo, that was a sick conversation. I would love to grab coffee sometime, and like talk again." And I was like, "Wow, like that's super cool. Like no one's asked me to do that ever. Like I'm hella flattered and like super
Yeah.
surprised." So
He
we
asked
grabbed
you
some
out on a
coffee.
date.
Yeah, pretty much it was a day, and I was like, "Wait a second, what's this guy want out of me?" But it was chill. So yeah, so we got coffee at this like it's a famous spot in Mac. It's called Williams Cafe. It's like right across the street. We
Mhm.
grabbed the coffee and we just had like another really, really good conversation just about like I don't know, AI, like the future of work, like things like that. Just like literally anything we can think about. And we had a lot of similar interests as well. And so yeah, so we kept talking. We did that 2 or 3 more times, and then Damien had mentioned that he was like trying to start something. He just felt like antsy. He was like, "Yeah, I just feel like I'm not creating as much as I wanted to." And I think I don't know, I don't remember if it was him or I, but like we caught on the topic of like the podcast I tried to start, and we're like, "Yo, like you know, why don't we start one?" Because like we have good conversations, and like it'd be cool to put them out. And honestly, I think it's a lot like like easier, I think, once you have a co-founder. Like I know that you do a lot of things on your own, but like personally for me, it was like nice to have someone I could lean on for sure. Because I was a
Hmm.
little intimidated about starting on my own. And then in addition to that, it was like the sort of the happy medium between, Damien and I had great conversations, but we weren't like super close personal friends. So it was
Right.
like we could do a little bit more business rather than, pleasure in terms of like, I wasn't afraid to get on his ass about certain things and like do certain things, and I
Right.
wasn't going to let it slip just because he was my friend and like things like that, vice versa as well. And obviously we became great friends throughout the course of like working on the podcast for the last year and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started, and I it's honestly been a great journey. I've met so many people through the podcast. I've like literally in San Francisco like 3 weeks ago, I met up with Cyrus, who has his own podcast. And yeah, like we met off of LinkedIn. He like cold DM me because he was like, "Yo, do you want to interview for my podcast?" I'm like, "I don't know who this guy is, but like his podcast seems okay." So like, it's
Yeah.
Who Am I podcast, by the way, for everyone listening. Super great, highly recommend it. But yeah, I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but like whatever. It seems like he has a cool podcast. I'll hop on. We had a conversation. It was a good conversation for sure, but it wasn't like life changing or anything. And then afterwards, we followed each other on Instagram, and like his style is just super dope. Like I'm really into fashion, and like the way he
Hmm.
styles some of his pieces was just super sick. And so like I DM'd him. I was like, "Yo, your feed is fire, bro." And like we started talking, and like we just
Yeah.
became super good friends. And then we met up in San Francisco, and it was like super awesome. Like we like hung out for like 4 hours. Like we got food everywhere. We like walked around the entire city, and I was like, "Damn, like this is really from like a cold message off of LinkedIn. Like that's crazy."
Yeah.
And so yeah, the podcast has been a great journey. That initial inspiration of wanting to just like kind of explain what I was going through, and like really just like try and give other people who are going through the same thing like advice, and sort of just like also it's a quasi therapy tool, I gotta admit. Like there's
Yeah.
definitely a few episodes where I'm just like talking about myself and like trying to figure shit out, and like that sounds
On
crazy.
air, trying to piece things together.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think that those are some of the
Yeah.
episodes that we've had the most positive feedback on, because I think a lot of people can relate, and like really like it's kind of heartening to see that somebody else like has the same problems as you, as cheesy
Yeah.
as it sounds. And so yeah, so the podcast has really grown from there, and I've been really glad to be able to be on this journey with Damien. So
Yeah, no, sounds great, man. I guess like the two thoughts I have on that is that it's great that I think the nice thing is like even though like you and Damien had that initial spark and stuff, people got to see that growth in the podcast as well, like when like your friendship
that's
growing through
awesome.
it.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think that's really nice to have on air. And I know like one of the biggest problems I've had, like I've had some friends in the past,
yeah,
but one of the biggest problems that we've had is that we have a lot of inside jokes now in our group because I've known these guys for a long time.
yeah,
Which of course to us it's hilarious, like we're having a
for
great
sure.
time, but to people who are listening they might not understand as much.
Hmm.
So I think it's cool that you and Damien can sort of build that on air with the podcast and stuff. And then the second thought I had was, turns out LinkedIn is better. You can use LinkedIn for more than just more than DMing recruiters apparently.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, 100%.
So
LinkedIn is a great tool. Yeah. Yeah. No, those are really good thoughts. Like I totally feel you on the first one, because like, the podcast I was telling you about that I tried to start in the beginning, like with my friends. Yeah, like we ran into that exact problem. Like it was hilarious as hell to us. Like we would die
yeah,
when we would listen back to some of these episodes. And then we were like, wait a second, like nobody knows this story. Like, are we gonna pause and like explain the story in like a cutscene type of thing? Like, how's that gonna work? Right. And so yeah, Damien and I, we try to keep it a little bit more professional, and it's not just like a for jokes podcast. Like there's definitely some actionable advice I want people to take away with them. But we've definitely been able to grow as people and as friends as well, like throughout the podcast. And so I've been really, really glad to see that. So thank you for noticing that. It means a lot.
yeah, for sure, man. And cool. Okay, so transitioning now once more. Let's talk about I know one of the biggest questions I always get is about getting internships. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about how you got a job at Twitter, maybe some of the process, some tips that you might have, and then Twitter as a company.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So how I got a job at Twitter, and then Twitter as a company, and sort of that process. So yeah, okay, I'll start with recruiting. So actually, Twitter has had kind of a weird history with intern recruiting. Namely, there's been one thing. So they used to do like a hackering challenge, and that hackering challenge was like memed the fuck out of on Reddit and stuff like that, because
Okay.
yeah, it was super mean. I don't know if you follow like CS career questions. It's a subreddit on Reddit, but basically, yeah, they're just like for career advice and things like that. But
Yeah.
basically, like Twitter would send out a hackering challenge, and like I don't know, like it was completely meaningless because like some people would do perfectly on it and not get an interview, and then some people wouldn't do it and would get an interview. So like it was kind of like, why are they even sending this? Like, what's the point? Type of thing. I
Right.
think since like they've been getting a lot of feedback on it this term, especially because all the interns were like, yeah, you should remove this. So I think they've removed it since they're opening up applications October 1st. So I guess people can see from there. But pretty much what happened was so the reason I'm mentioning that is because 2 years ago I actually did the hacker rank and I didn't get an interview. And so whatever, unfortunate, but like it is what it is. And then
Yeah.
this year I didn't do the hacker rank, and I did get an interview. So like obviously I applied online and things like that, and I was kind of just like in the pipeline. And then I had I think a little bit of an atypical recruiting season with Twitter because I know a lot of people got their offers in September and August, which is typically when people get them. This year
Right.
they're starting a little bit later because of COVID, but typically like people get offers in August and September. I didn't get my offer until February. And so basically, yeah, sometime in early February, I got an email that was like, hey, this team at Twitter is like super interested in you. Twitter's a little bit more like Tesla in the sense of specific teams recruit, and it's not just like a like host matching process like Google with like a general
Right. Right.
interview. Like your interview is a little bit more tailored to your team and things like that, which is pretty cool. And I think like frankly works a lot better, just because yeah, I think there's like obviously specific things that teams should be looking for, but yeah, so like yeah, a recruiter reached out to me. He was like, hey, Twitter's interested in interviewing you for this role on this team, like let me know if you'd be like down to start the process. And I was like, yeah, for sure. So got hopped on a call with him. It was a great experience. He like really sold the team super super well. And then that was like sort of like my first phone screen, and then I went through three technical interviews, well, two technical interviews and one top grading interview, and they were all back to back to back over the phone, obviously because COVID. And
Right.
so yeah, so it was like a 3 hour session, which is kind of a lot, honestly. I wish I had a little bit more of a break between them, but it is what it is. And yeah, so like the first two were like lead code style. I would say like lead code medium to hards. Um, Obviously, do your best to get those questions. I think I got both of them in optimal time. And then the third was a top grading interview with my manager where they basically like walk through your experiences from literally from high school until like your current, internship hunt. And so they go through every position on your resume, which at the time was like quite a few for me. Um,
Yeah.
and they like ask you to kind of explain the story behind each one, what you worked on, like why you chose to work there, like what led to the next one, like that type of thing. So it's a little bit technical, but definitely a lot of like interpersonal things and like situational questions as well. And then
Hmm.
after that, you either get your offer or you don't. And so, yeah, I was fortunate enough to get an offer. And at the time, I was deciding between two other companies as well as Twitter. And so I need a little bit more time to decide. So I extended the process by a couple weeks. And then I had an extra call with my recruiter and an extra call with my manager just to like make sure that, the project selection was there for me if I joined the team. And, just to like kind of reestablish like the team vibe and like really make sure like I like you know like could see myself grabbing a beer with some of the guys on the team, and like
Right.
so that was good. And then yeah, ended up accepting the offer like early March I think, and then started June. So that was kind of, I would say it's a pretty typical process in general for tech, although my timeline was a little bit later than most people's. And then I had a couple extra interviews just to be sure, because I was like I had a couple competing offers as well. um,
Hmm.
so yeah, that was Twitter. Some tips. Obviously, apply as early as you can. Apps are opening October 1st. Yeah, like brush up on your lead code. Like this is just typical advice for like software engineering positions in general. They also have a PM internship. And I can't give you specific advice for recruiting on that, unfortunately, because I did not recruit for PM at Twitter. But I do know some people who did. So if you want, let me know and I can put you in contact with someone. But I would imagine it's pretty similar to like any kind of PM internship.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Sweet, just do as much lead code as you can, brush up on your experiences, make your resume good. Like I feel like it's like pretty general advice at this point. Similar for any big end company type of thing. In terms of like the actual interview and stuff, I think Twitter is not just leak code style. Like I did get a couple leak code questions and things like that, but Twitter does a really good job of like, really holistically looking at your solution and also like asking you questions that really relate to the stuff they're working on.
Yeah.
And trying to like make it not just like a, oh, do you know the answer to this question type of thing, which I did sort of have that experience with a couple other bigger companies, where I felt like it was literally just like a code this question for me and like that's it. So I will say that Twitter did not have that experience, which was really, really pleasant. So that was good. So that was how I kind
Hmm.
of recruited at Twitter and some tips for that. For Tesla, I also worked as a SWE at Tesla. So how I got the position is pretty cool actually. So I was like scrolling through LinkedIn one day. I think it was like on the toilet, like literally on the toilet, like scrolling through LinkedIn on my phone. And I saw like a post that like one of my friends had liked.
Yeah.
And so I like you know how like it pops up on your feed if like a friend likes another post. And
Yeah.
so this friend of mine was Daniel Jabor. He's currently at Tesla, but he was also at Tesla like 3 terms ago. Working on Ryan's team. I don't know if you know Ryan at all. He's in the energy software org. He worked on Autobidder and like some of the UI components there.
Okay.
But yeah, so he worked on Ryan's team, and so like he knew Colin Breck, who's like a manager
Yeah.
of the energy product software team, and who ended up being my manager. And so he like he had liked an article that Colin had written, and obviously I didn't know any of this at the time. And so I read the article, and I was like super impressed. And so like I messaged him, I was like, "Yo, is this guy cool?" Like, and he's like, "Yeah, this guy's like one of the smartest people I've ever worked with." And I was like, "Wow,
Hmm.
okay, cool." And so like I messaged Colin, I was like, "Hey, I read your article. Like, would love to like hop on a call and like talk about some of the ideas behind it." He works on distributed systems, and like distributed systems was like something I was like tangentially interested in at the time, just because like I'd had some more front end experience. I had some like classical like API backend experience, and like I wanted to like kind of branch out and like learn something new for my next internship. And
Yeah.
so I messaged Colin, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, let's hop on a call." And like we talked about some of the ideas behind what he was working on, and some of the products that Tesla is like releasing and things like that. And it just sounded super exciting. And so I asked him at the end of the call, I was like, "Hey, like this is all really cool. Like I think it's really interesting technically, and I think it's like world changing stuff. Like I was wondering if your team is hiring." And he's like, "Yeah, for sure. Like send me your resume." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I emailed him my resume, and then I got like ghosted for like 6 weeks, I want to say. And I
Yeah.
followed up like every week, literally every week. And Colin's a super busy dude. His team works on like way too much work for like how big the team is, for sure.
I think that's most
To their
Tesla,
credit.
but
Yeah, to their credit, for sure, to their credit.
yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, obviously, kind of bummed out that I didn't get a response, but I was like trying to be persistent. And then I think one day he like emailed back and he was like, "Yo, are you down for an interview in the next couple of days?" I'm like, "Yeah, for sure." So I had like 1 or 2 days to prepare, I feel like. And then I had my first round interview. My first round interview was like, again, just like a little bit more of an overview of the team, and then some technical questions related to what the team worked on. It wasn't like really leak code style, though there were like comparable questions, I would say, in terms of like coding and like demonstrating like good coding practices.
Right.
And then I had an assignment, and that was like kind of like a take home. I had a weekend to do it. And they said you didn't have to do it in Scala, which is the language of choice of the team. But like I felt like I really wanted to like kind of impress them, so maybe I spent a little bit more time than they had allocated for me to do that assignment. He was like, "You shouldn't spend more than 4 or 5 hours on this." I definitely spent a little bit more than 4 or 5 hours, but
Right.
I consider that learning Scala. Anyway, so I wrote in Scala to try and impress them, and then ended up like getting the okay to do like one last interview. And that last interview was kind of just a review of the assignment, where they take another engineer from the team. One, it's like kind of just like to gauge if you'd be a good person to pair program with, which I think is
Yeah.
super important at any company. Like if you can take critique on your code, you can like really work through problems with your code with somebody else and things like that. Because obviously I didn't write like world changing code. I literally just learned the language, and like these guys are like wizards at what they do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that experience is pretty cool. And then obviously they really pick apart your code and like try to understand things technically, and like you have to really defend yourself, and like also like be able to take feedback and like explain your design choices and things like that. And what I really liked about the assignment was that it was like extremely related to what that team was working on, in terms of like it was. I mean, I can't give away the assignment, unfortunately, but it was really related to what the team was working on with distributed systems. And so that was really cool. I could easily see like what kind of impact I would be able to have on the team and things like that. And so after
Hmm.
that interview, I got the offer, and then I signed. And so this all happened in like 3 weeks in October, I want to say. And I got the offer like mid October. And then
Yeah.
that was
After
pretty
getting
much
ghosted for 6 weeks.
yeah, exactly. I think I messaged like early September or like late August or something like that. And then I
Yeah.
got a response early October. And then, yeah, like 5 or 6 weeks I was ghosted. But yeah, I mean, yeah, he's a busy guy. So I totally do not blame him. But yeah.
Yeah, fair enough, man. Like when I was there, he was definitely running around all the time. So,
Yeah.
or I guess virtually hopping on different meetings all the time.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I
Yeah.
can definitely relate.
Yeah.
But cool. No, thank you so much. I think that sort of has Twitter and Tesla covered.
Yeah.
And I think those are some great tips for people looking. And I think
Yeah.
I guess like as an overall thing, you've gone down to specific companies and stuff, but what is just some advice general advice that you have for people looking for internships?
Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously, there's like the whole generic advice that like, work on your resume, work on personal projects, blah blah blah. I think really what you kind of need to do is just simplify the process as much as you can. Really, to get a job, at least in SWE, there's only two things you need to do. You need to get an interview, and then you need to crush the interview. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, that sounds like an oversimplification, but really, that's all it is. And then you kind of like branch out your problems from there. So, okay, to get an interview, I have to have a good resume. To have a good resume, I have to have either really good experiences or personal projects or impact at like certain companies, blah blah blah. You can get it like deep from there. And then to crush an interview for SWE, at least, it's pretty much just leak code. You have to mock interview, obviously, so you can like it's not just you solving the question by yourself, but you communicating
Explain
that in
it.
a proper way.
Mhm.
So do a lot of that, but that's really all you have to do. And those are the two things I would focus on. And then obviously there comes along with that like the whole world of networking as well. And I think that's something that I didn't really take advantage of, my first couple times recruiting. And then obviously, with Tesla, it was a completely different story. Um, I think just like not being afraid to message people you think are working on cool stuff and being really, really genuine about it. And I talk a little bit about this shameless plug on my networking episode on the podcast, but basically just like if you're gonna like talk to somebody, just really focus on what you can kind of learn from them as a person, as a professional, as an engineer, and not really focus on like the job itself. Like, don't be like, oh, I like this conversation is only a win if I get a referral or I get an
Yeah.
offer an interview or if I get a job offer from it. Like, no, that's not what you should be going into with conversations. And I did not go into that conversation with Colin like thinking that at all. I was like, yo, this guy works on some super, super cool stuff. Like it would be super cool to like be able to talk to him about like some of these things, right? And like I
Mhm.
genuinely didn't know that much about distributed systems, so it was like I was like riveted the entire conversation. He's a great speaker, so kudos to him for that as well. So yeah, I think that's like a big part of it. Like yeah, just being genuine about it. And like also, a lot of people like obviously message recruiters and things like that. And recruiters are busy people and they probably get thousands of DMs. But personally speaking, like I find it a little bit more effective to message engineers on teams and things like that. And then they can refer you to a recruiter. But then once you get to the recruiter, it's like, okay, well, they have the engineer stamp of approval
Right.
and like they've already like obviously done a lot of research on the team and they know what team they're interested in, so it's not like a matter of like me connecting with the team, right? So reduce a
Yeah.
lot of work for the recruiter. And engineers, I just feel like have a little bit more of like obviously they have a lot more technical knowledge on what they're working on, right? And so it's a little bit more of like a technically interesting conversation. I'm not saying you can't have great conversation with recruiters, but most likely if you're talking to a recruiter, you're not having like an in-depth technical discussion of architecture, right? And
Mhm.
so you're able to do that with a lot of the engineers or managers and things like that. And I think that just makes for more interesting conversations and makes it seem like less of a chore. So that's one of the approaches I take to kind of like networking and recruiting as well. So yeah,
Yeah. No, 100%, man. I'm totally with you there. I think that's a problem I see, like when people reach out to managers with just the intent of getting a job.
yeah,
Like it's like if I said this on a different podcast, but it's like if you're walking down the street and I'm like,
hmm,
"Hey, yo, can I get a job at Google?" You're gonna be like, "What?" Like
yeah,
if you're a manager at Google, you're gonna be like, "Wait, what? Who are you?"
yeah,
And I think that's like really it. Like when you go in with the intent of just getting a job out of somebody, like
hmm,
nobody's gonna like that because you
yeah,
don't really care about them as a person. You just care about using them.
yeah,
So I think when you go more with the intent to actually learn, um, like learn what they're doing and sort of understand what the company is working on, and then for yourself, how you can apply those lessons that person learned. I think that goes a lot further. And I think for myself, when I changed my approach, because I was applying for internships and stuff, I wasn't really getting like much success, and I think when I changed my approach from just trying to squeeze into a company and like trying to get hired to actually figuring out what I have to do like figuring out what the company does first of all, and then secondly what I have to do personally to get to that level per se,
hmm,
to make them interested in me. I think that went a lot further, of course, like and it paid off.
for sure.
So I think that's definitely like another thing. Like, don't try to squeeze in or something like that. Like, if you want to work
Mhm.
in one of these companies, then try actually figuring out what they need or what you could do to improve your chances, not just try trickling in.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I absolutely agree. It's about delivering that value and just like, like no one's just like talk to you and do you a favor because they just like literally talk to you once. Like, you have to build a relationship. You have to give them something. It's like a quid pro quo type of thing. And I think that, yeah, all that you mentioned is like super, super valid as well. But yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, cool. Cool. Thank you so much, Swad. I think one last question is, what is your future plans? You mentioned that you're recruiting right now,
Yeah.
but how's that going? And then ultimately, like, what do you think you want to do? You want to do software engineering, or what's your plan?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. I think, and obviously, like I mentioned before, this comes to the caveat that like trying to stay away from like some longer term planning in terms of just like, I want to really figure out what I want in my career right now, what are the best opportunities for my growth and things like that. I think one of the biggest things right now is choosing what city to live in. I'm deciding between SF and New York, and I'm like still like not 100% sure on which one I want to live in. So that's like a big thing. I think in terms of like offers and like recruiting and things like that, I am actively recruiting. And then hopefully I do have like a full time offer from Twitter to go back to, and like a route to interviewing at Tesla as well.
Hmm.
So those are like obviously within my consideration too. But I think in addition to that, I'm actually very interested in the world of PM, and we've talked about this a little bit before, like just like offhand, but definitely
Hmm.
super interested in PM. And I'm actively recruiting for APM programs as well. They're a little bit notorious for being like super difficult to like get into. So it is what it is. If I don't get in, I don't get in. But I definitely am looking to transition into PM at some point in the near future, like whether it's like a year after doing Sweet or like 2 years after doing Sweet or right after new grad, just to see what it's like. I'm not like set on PM as being like an end all career choice, but I think
Yeah.
that one of the reasons I joined tech was that I thought it's a really cool way to work on any kind of problem in the world. Like literally any problem in the world, you can work on it if you're in tech. Whether it be clean energy, like hate speech and abuse, like bioterrorism, like literally anything that you want to work on, you can work on in tech.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons I joined tech, and I realized that like with solving some of these like super important problems, obviously code is important, and writing good code is super important, but there's so much more that comes along with solving these problems, and I think PM gets to do a lot of those things in terms of like marketing, user acquisition, like product design, coordinating between different stakeholders, like creating a unified vision, right? And like data analysis, analytics, like so many different skills that you get to flex. And like I think I would love to like get the chance to like kind of work on some of those things as well. So actively recruiting for APM roles. And then yeah, I mean in terms of like further than that, I am applying to deferred MBA programs right now. So
Okay.
for those who don't know, deferred MBA programs are basically you get in your college or your senior year of college, so like your last year of undergrad, and then you don't actually go for 2 to 4 years post grad. Like you have to work for 2 to 4 years after graduating, but you have that
Mhm.
acceptance and you can cash it in at any point from 2 to 4 years in the future. So it's kind of like a good thing because, well, first off, you're competing against college seniors who, let's be frank, like a lot of them don't know that they want to do an MBA, even if they will do one later. Plus, like
Right.
a little bit less of a competitive applicant pool because when you're 28 and you're applying against like McKinsey and Goldman Sachs dudes that are like super talented and have started like 3 or 4 companies before, it's a little bit harder to get into Harvard.
Right.
But like it's obviously a little bit easier in terms of, or I don't want to say easier, but it's a different applicant pool when you're applying in college. And so
No, 100%. Yeah.
I think I definitely have a well, I don't want to say better either because I don't know what my career is going to look like at 28. But I think I definitely want to take advantage of like some of the experiences I have, and be able to apply right now. And then if I don't want to go on and do my MBA, there's not like a contractual obligation or like you have to like sell your like firstborn child if you don't go. You know what I mean? So like I can always say
Yeah.
no if I need to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm planning to do, and that's sort of like I guess the next like 2 to 5 years ish mapped out.
Hmm.
But I'm not
Yeah.
really
I mean,
beyond that yet.
a
Yeah,
lot of options on the table, right? And I think that's,
for
I
sure.
mean, personally, I think that's the right way to go. Of course, everybody has their own opinion, but I think sort of being open to different things,
Yeah,
evaluating, then after, after things pan out, what do you want to do? And then taking a decision, I think is a great way to do it.
for sure.
Um, and yeah, best of luck deciding on the city. Have you ever actually lived in New York? I know you lived in San Francisco, but
Yeah, so I've never lived in New York, but I would spend like
okay.
about 3 weeks there every summer because my uncle lived there. So I guess it's not like living because it's like less than a month a year, but I would go there quite often. So I feel like I know the vibe of the city pretty well. But
Yeah.
yeah, not the same as like living there for 4 months on your own. So
Okay.
no, and I know that you have. So I've asked you a few questions about it before, but yeah, if you have any advice, feel free to shoot it my way.
Yeah, for sure. We can talk about that offline. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Fuad. Definitely was a great conversation. And any last remarks you want to add?
No, thank you so much for having me on. Like, this is something I've been meaning to do for a while, so glad I could finally do it. Yeah, for those of you listening, yeah, feel free to check out Into the Adultverse as well. I feel like our listeners probably have a lot of similar interests, so there's definitely a topic that you could vibe with as well. And yeah, thank you so much for the conversation. It's been a pleasure and glad I could hop on.
Perfect. And yeah, guys, stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for listening and take care. Bye.